Hello, I'm Victoria and I'm irrationally opinionated about silly little knitting tools. Let's talk about the notions that I love, the pointless ones, and the random stuff I use instead. I don't want to tell you what you can't buy. I just want to take some of the pressure off the people that think they have to buy literally everything to do any crafting at all, and just tell you about things that worked for me. Let's start with knitting needles. There are two main categories. So there's circulars and there's straight knitting needles. Some people start knitting on straight knitting needles, which I think is absolutely wild. They are the kind of older type, you know, the ones that you see grandmas with. I certainly wouldn't recommend buying those unless you find them really cheap for like 50p at a yarn store, or you get them from your gran. They are a lot less ergonomic. Your hand and wrist might hurt a lot more because there's a lot more weight. You're just having all of that pressure on this part of your hand. Option number two is circular knitting needles, which have like other subcategories. They are knitting needles that have a little cord connecting them. A lot of the weight of the project is in the middle of the work, so it's spread equally between your hands, and then also you will have that on your lap as well. There are fixed circular knitting needles and there's also interchangeable ones. Fixed ones are, as the name suggests, fixed. You can't detach the cable, you just have to use the length of the cable and the size of the needle that is attached together. Whereas interchangeables, you literally have a cable and then you attach the knitting needle tips to it, which is very useful if you want to change the size of your needles, for example for ribbing. The pro of circular knitting needles is that they allow you to knit in the round rather than knitting flat and having to seam things, but obviously you get a lot more options with those, because you can still knit flat on circular knitting needles. The flat needle alternative to having cables is DPNs, which allow you to knit in the round. However, I find them a lot more faff than just knitting on magic loop, which is basically having a loop on each side of your needles, so that you just get a lot more cord length and smaller circumferences. There are various different materials that your needles can be, but most commonly you will find either metal or wood or sometimes plastic, but I wouldn't recommend plastic at all. As you progress from the porosity of the material, you also progress with the slipperiness of the material. The porosity and the extra friction does make it easier to knit with slippery yarns, and especially when you're first starting out. However, it does also slow you down, so if you want to speed up your knitting, you can go to metal needles. I have a very tight gauge, so I basically pull my yarn too tight, which ends up me not being able to pull my stitches off wooden needles. Thus, I have to use metal ones. Typically, knitting needles are about 5 inches, I believe, but you can also buy shorter ones, and then you can also buy super short knitting needles, which allow you to knit very small circumferences, such as socks, and they help you knit on sleeves a lot easier. However, the issue with those is that you might have a little bit of wrist pain, and a lot of people find them very uncomfortable to knit on, again, because you do not have that support on your hands. There are also various different types of needle shapes that you can have. So you can have a square instead of the typical round ones, or you can have triangular ones. So the cross section of the needle will be the shape of a square or a triangle, and that is meant to help with grip and allows you to knit when you have conditions such as arthritis. I'm not sure how useful they are, but they are meant to help, though I haven't really tried them myself. I originally started with a set of fixed circular wooden, like bamboo needles that I bought from Amazon a few years ago. They worked fine. I don't think I would recommend that as a starting point, especially that I kind of had to get rid of them, and then the fact that they were fixed didn't really allow me for the fun of like being able to switch straight away into the ribbing. I had to like put the stitches onto a different needle size, and it just took a lot more effort. I decided to get interchangeables. I didn't have the money to buy a full set, so I just bought the sizes that I needed for each specific project that I was knitting at the time. And then recently I ended up splurging out and investing in a set of interchangeable knitting needles from ChowGoo. I do think they are absolutely amazing. They just feel such good quality compared to the ones that I had previously. I did use Knit Pro needles and they were okay, but I did find that the metal kind of the coating wore off and you could see the copper underneath, and then also the cables tend to pop out as you're using them. There's also swivel cables which kind of turn as you're knitting so that you don't end up with like a twisted loop of a cable. But unfortunately, I think after about half an hour of using those, they just break for me. Like, they literally break at the join. I'm not rough with my knitting or anything, I just think they are not made very well, because I've tried out like several of them from Knit Pro. I just ended up having to replace my cables all the time and they would fall out of my projects. So then I ended up going for Chow Goose, as recommended by some people on my Instagram. But I totally wouldn't say that that is a necessity. I just do knit so much that I felt like it was something that I could justify. However, I think if you're first starting out, or even if you just don't have the disposable income to like spend a stupid amount of money on knitting needles, I think it's totally fine to use Knit Pro, or Drops have quite cheap knitting needles. And obviously if you like wood, there's other companies. I do really recommend just buying the needles that you need for a project, especially if you're not someone that knits like all the time. Chow Goose do come with needle stoppers, like a little tightening thing. My Knit Pros did come with tightening key. I did find that the needles would untwist out of the connection, even though I did tighten them very, very hard. But the Chow Goose do have this kind of silicone grip holding thing. It makes my needles like absolutely impossible to remove without them, which is very, very useful. I don't know if you can buy it separately, but I would really recommend that if you do have an issue with your needles unscrewing from the joint. When I first started knitting, I made my first ever object, which was a purple cardigan with acrylic yarn, and I just thought, because it's so cheap and I was only first starting out, that's kind of what I went for, because obviously the clothes I would buy in a store were also made out of acrylic, so it was just kind of what I knew. And I thought, oh my god, it's so cheap, it's so good, it's gonna be cheaper than actually buying clothes in store, which I thought was insane. I don't wear any of the acrylic things that I have made, because since I have discovered wool and natural fibers, and I think they are such a game changer for someone that used to buy like ready-wear clothing and doesn't really like the feel of them or how they don't keep you warm. If you are looking for like cheaper options, there are obviously kind of yarns such as Dropped, which do compromise the kind of quality aspect and the like sustainability and treating people and animals fairly, but you do have to have that trade-off if you want something cheaper, and there's nothing like to shame anyone for buying those yarns. I mean, I still buy them, and like at times when I can't afford better yarns. When I first started out, obviously I couldn't afford like more expensive yarns and I would use Drops all the time. I do think their yarn is very nice for the price level that they have. I do find that Sandnes Garn in the UK is also quite affordable. I wanted to show off my first ever knitting project. It was a recreation of the Kylie Jenner cardigan that Tiffany Liu created, and I really wanted to knit it as well, and I did it in this really bad acrylic yarn. I did go into a purple phase, but I much prefer this shade of purple than this really bright kind of ugly purple. It does have very cute embroidery on it though. If you don't want to think about what notions and what yarn and what tools you need to get, you could just get a Hooks and Needles subscription box, which is the sponsor of today's video. The projects in there are just little and you can finish them quite quickly. You just get this instant dopamine hit. If you haven't heard of Hooks and Needles, they are monthly subscription boxes which provide you with any yarn and knitting notions and tools that you may need for completing those projects. Very cool, especially for people that do have choice paralysis and struggle with figuring out what they're gonna knit. In each box you get this cool little magazine with 3 different patterns. I went for the crochet. I'm knitting this cute little glasses pouch. It did turn out very, very big for a glasses case. I do think this would be an adorable coaster. Apart from crochet, Hooks and Needles also have knitting boxes and amigurumi, which I would love to try out now that I've tried out crochet. I think that will be so cute. Thank you to Hooks and Needles for sponsoring this video and helping me try out a cute little new craft. If you also want to try them out, you should use my code BlankStitches20 for 20% off your first box. Speaking about yarn, protecting your wool from moths is kind of an important topic. A lot of people have the misconception that using lavender or cedar wood will prevent the moths from kind of eating away your yarn, but that is not entirely the case. It might slightly repel adult moths from like coming into your stash, but that really depends on how strong the scent is. So you might have to buy new packets quite often so that it does smell quite strong, and also it won't prevent from the moths implanting in your yarn. It might just kind of prevent them from being quite as attracted to it. Moths aren't actually as bad of an issue as you might think they are. Like, if you think about all the yarn stores, the amount of yarn that they have out and about that isn't covered or stored is so much more than you have at your home. So if you don't have a massive stash and you go into your yarn quite frequently, it should be totally fine. You shouldn't have a moth problem. Moths don't like being disturbed. They prefer having chill, dark environment where they're not being touched. With garments, it is useful for you to wash them before you store them away for longer periods of time. That will prevent moths, but I also don't do that all the time and I store my knits and they're totally fine. I'm praying for not having a moth infestation. The best things you can do is just keeping your knits clean. You shouldn't also put them into plastic bags or anything like that, because your will start smelling funny, because it will take the water in from the atmosphere. It will just go smelly and mouldy and gross, so I wouldn't recommend doing that. Moths also aren't a problem if you do knit with acrylic or cotton or any plant fibres, because moths are really only interested in things like silk or wool or just any animal fibres, because they're interested in the proteins, whereas kind of cotton, you haven't got proteins in there, it's just sugar, it's chains of cellulose. If you do find moths in your home, the best way of going about it is putting your knits in the freezer. Typically, the moths will lay eggs and kind of implant on the areas that have food particles or sweat. When I first started out, I was so confused where I could find patterns, and I was trying to find them on YouTube, which obviously you can use that. There's loads of different things, such as Handmade by Florence's step-by-step sweater and step-by-step cardigan. She's also got a socks knitting pattern, but I do really recommend using Ravelry and Etsy. They have really lovely patterns, especially on Ravelry. You find it a lot easier to kind of search through patterns. You can save them onto your account. You can find free patterns on there as well, which is great. I personally do not print out my knitting patterns typically. I usually would have it on my phone or on my iPad, and I would use their markup tool to just write on it, highlight any of the areas that I have finished. If I have a chart, I will just highlight the rows that I have finished. I was recently knitting a frog. I had to highlight all of the information that I have gone through, because you have to go like row by row because the instructions change and there's not much repetition, so I did have to follow it with a highlighter every time. On your phone you can just zoom in on the pattern. If you haven't got a great eyesight, it's probably not the best idea, but you can also use a laptop if you have one. If you do like printing out your patterns, I did hear a very cool hack of using washi tape to kind of follow your knitting so that you're able to know where you are in the like colourwork chart or something, which I thought was a really good idea. You don't have to use a highlighter. Scissors. You don't really need them that desperately. Like, a lot of the time I would just break my yarn, but obviously it can be a little bit painful with certain fibres. If you're using acrylic, it's not that easy, but if you're just using wool, sometimes you can just snap it. You can also use paper scissors or nail scissors or even toenail clippers. Obviously clean ones, don't use the same ones you use for your toes, it's a little bit iffy. I mean, you can, but I wouldn't do that. It's not a necessity to buy them, but I did like having a pair, and I bought a pair to travel with so that I could kind of cut off my yarn on the plane. There is a length limit for scissors on planes. I think it's 2 centimeters. So I got this pair of very short scissors from my local yarn store. They're very cute. They're just black little ones. I do find it very annoying that I can't find them all the time. I do end up snapping my yarn. Stitch markers. They are a very underutilized tool by me in the past, and I didn't really understand how to use them, but in the past few months I've really grown to love them because they are just so useful, especially if you're knitting lace or cables or anything like that that you need to keep track of. You do not need to buy them. You can just use scrap yarn, you can use safety pins from clothes, or as I used to do is earrings. So if you wear hoop earrings just like I do, you can just pop them off on public transport and pop them onto your needle so that you know where you are and where your beginning of round is. And then once you get home, you can get a little scrap piece of yarn and then put it around that area, or you can just keep the earring in there and just walk around with that one, which is also something that I would do. Sacrifices for my knitting that I would make. If you do decide to buy stitch markers, then I would really recommend going for locking stitch markers rather than already locked ones, because they are just so much more easy to remove. I initially got these little plastic ones with my blocking mats, however I only have this last one left because all of the other ones just snapped. I think the type of plastic they used is very kind of prone to deterioration. It just went too hard and then just ended up snapping. I then purchased a pack of these plastic ones that are a little bit better quality, and I think they were really overpriced for what they are because I didn't get that many. Recently, as recommended by my friend Candid Knit, I went for this box of Katia interlocking stitch markers, which are just so cute. They're in these cute rainbow pastel colours and I just love using them on my project. I mark my sleeve decreases in this cute little rainbow so that it goes through like the gradient of all the colours. I do have the purple and pink and orange, I think, on my other sleeve. As recommended by my friend Candid Knit, I move ones that I have knit onto the other sleeve, and then you essentially don't have to count your decreases anymore because you just follow the stitch markers that you had, which is totally genius, and I just have not come up with that before. This is totally not something that you need, but I do find it useful now that I have slightly more stitch markers. Is this organizer, but it's for pills actually. I was very influenced by Woozy by Celine. She recommended this magnetic pill holder from Amazon and it's actually really cool. As you can see, I do have some locked stitch markers in there as well. They are from Hand Dyed Harmony. I got them also with those little cute unicorn and the flower ones, which I think are just totally adorable. I'm a bit more precious with them than I am with my Katia stitch markers because they were just like, there was 60 of them, so I can just use them, and if I lose them it's fine. I did find this to be a very good tool. I find that I lose my stitch markers a lot less because I can just pop them back in there. And also the magnets. Some people may find that annoying, and I sort of do, but also I find it quite useful because you don't lose the stitch markers. If they are metal, they do get stuck to the magnet, and then when you're trying to get them out, they do just kind of flap about and then pop onto the magnet. That means that they won't fall out of the holder, they just stick to the magnet instead. The plastic ones are very useful if you are blocking and you want to keep your stitch markers in, because the metal ones might rust. And yeah, it's not very fun when they do. Another notion which I mentioned earlier are darning needles, and I do have those ones, and I also have my lovely hooks and needles ones. The hooks and needles ones are a very welcome addition to my stash because I find that I actually don't lose them, but I watch them like a hawk. For a very long time I only had one darning needle, and every time I lost it I would spend like 10 minutes looking for it in my kind of all of my bags and everything, because I desperately needed my darning needles to weave in some ends or do an Italian bind off. Then I went on holiday to Turkey and I bought a pack of like 3 at a market for like 50p or something. They're really not expensive and they're very useful tool in your toolkit, especially if you are doing those more complicated bind offs like Italian or tubular cast off. It is something that's very cheap and very useful. I wouldn't recommend not having one. I've heard that there are needles with like a bent tip at the end, and apparently they're a bit more useful for like weaving in ends and stuff. I haven't tried them before so I can't tell, but they do seem like a cool idea, so I might try them out in the future. If you don't know what a darning needle is, they are literally just slightly thicker needles with a slightly bigger hole than you would normally have for like sewing needles. And I have in the past tried using sewing needles, but they really are a massive pain. Considering that these darning needles aren't that expensive, it is a worthwhile investment and you won't have to buy that many unless you lose them. This pill box has actually kind of changed my life and it has been really useful for not losing things. Measuring tape, which is something that I hold in my Katia Stitch Markers box. I have this very old one that I probably have stolen from my grandma. If you have this kind of type of measuring tape that's made out of plastic. They do stretch over time and they might be inaccurate, so it might be useful to just take a ruler and measure it. I don't think it happens that quickly, but you don't want to find out that your measuring tape is incorrect once you've knitted a project. This is very useful for gauge swatches or just for measuring yourself, for measuring sleeves, literally anything. They are not expensive. You can get really cute ones where they like fold out like Bear or something, and you can press a button and it just like springs back in. But I do just have like the old school one because it's been worth, like it's worked for me. I don't need a fancy one. Speaking of gauge, you can either use a ruler to measure your gauge swatch, or you can make your own gauge square. So you would literally do like a little square out of paper or cardboard, 10 by 10 centimeters or 4 by 4 inches, so then you can count exactly within the borders of that square, which I think is really cool. Obviously you can buy them, but why would you if you can just make one? What I also do is I actually got this hack from Morgan Unraveled. When I do a gauge swatch, I will take a picture of it. I never count it like in real life because I find that I lose count, and I will use my photos markup app on my phone, and then I will write down the needle size I used for this swatch, and then also I will put like a line at the top of the stitches I'm counting, at the bottom, and then between on both sides, and then I can count the stitches and the rows a lot easier than I would like having to do it any other way, really. I will put a ruler as I'm doing the swatch picture, obviously. It's really useful to have those pictures saved because then you know what needle size you tried out rather than having to guess, because you might forget over time, and then you can always check what gauge you get with what needle size. I just thought that was a really cool hack, and then you can put it into like a photos folder in your phone called swatches or something like that, and then you're sorted. For measuring as a ruler, I do typically use my phone. There is a ruler app that I will link down below. Typically I cannot be bothered to like get a ruler out of my knitting like Notions box. I'm just using my phone. And then also the iPhone measuring app is quite surprisingly accurate, so I will use that as well. You basically pop a dot and then you go down, and then you pop another dot and it will tell you the distance between them. I don't think they're very accurate for like millimeters or anything like that. I always double check, but like as a guide they are very useful. I think this thing is so useful. I just love this. I have another one. It's also a ruler. Very cool. Needle sizes will rub off of your needles, especially off of metal, and you won't be able to tell over time. Obviously if you store them in like labeled sections within your needle case, then yeah, you're fine. But if you have them on a project and you forget, it's just nice and useful to be able to measure kind of your needles. I used to do it all the time, that's why I got one. I just found it very useful. It's not an essential, but it makes life a lot easier. And obviously if you buy a needle like set, then you will probably get it with it. And a cheap alternative is obviously to label the spaces in your Notions pouch. Speaking of needle cases and Notions pouches, I actually haven't got a like aesthetic pretty one. I think this is a pencil case that I had in like school or something, and I just keep using it. I haven't embroidered this, I just bought this like that. I also use a little baggie that I got with some nail polish that I bought, and I keep my needle cords in there because I haven't got room in my Notions pouch. I refused to buy a new needle pouch, and I didn't like all of the ones that were online, so I decided to make one. And this is a tutorial by Cool Stitches on YouTube. I think she's got a free pattern as well. It was just a sewing pattern. However, I did not realise that she actually had a free sewing pattern, and I didn't want to pay for one, so I thought I would reverse engineer it myself. That's why mine looks a little bit ugly and isn't so great. But as you can see, it's just in this canvas with pretty lavenders on the back and then a purple bias binding. Very on brand. It served me quite well, however my needles do tend to fall out and it's a little bit annoying. She also has a, I think, Notions bag, like Notions pouch, free pattern, and also I think this is a paid pattern. She's got a Frankie bag or something, which is a project bag pattern. Once I purchased my ChowGoo knitting needles, they did come in this slightly ugly case, I can't lie. But it is very useful. I do like how the needles are organised within there, and they are all labelled. I didn't have to use a pencil to label them. Actually, Petite Knit does sell like those, I think they're stickers for fabric, or you can iron them on or something with numbers for your needle sizes, which is very cool. Postage from Petite Knit to where I live is a little bit expensive, so I haven't done that, and I just used a pencil to write on my fabric one. Speaking of project bags, I know you have about 100 canvas bags in your home, and you should use those as project bags because they're probably cute, or they're just bland and basics. You don't need to buy all of the cute project bags. I haven't bought one. I did receive one from my boyfriend as a sneaky Christmas gift, I think. He showed me different patterns on project bags, and then I was like, oh, this one looks cute, and then he got it for me, which was very cute. I think he duped me into thinking that it was a laptop bag for his gran, which was very, very cute. I'll show it off in a sec. Since I got it as a gift, I do use it, and this is my only project bag. I do also use just my like canvas tote bags that I have 100 of for my projects. I actually put this project bag into a different bag because I find it a lot easier, because this one doesn't have like arm handles that I can carry it with. I find these a little bit too short. It's okay, but if I'm wearing a coat, it's not very comfy. It does like, but I don't know. It's a cool gift, but it's not an essential, and I want to de-influence you because I know some people feel like pressured into buying them in a way. They just see everyone have them, and I totally do not think it's an essential. You can also use the wool warehouse organza bags that they send you yarn in. Like, those would be pretty good project bags. I do store all of my yarn in those bags because like they're breathable, so they get like air in, and then it kind of prevents like any moths like getting in. I don't think they'd be able to get through the mesh organza situation, and it's also plastic, so they wouldn't be able to eat it, which is perfect. Wool wash is something that I bought that I wasn't in a very good financial position in, and I thought I did really need that because everyone's talking about wool wash. Like, there's this super fancy one that Petite Knit sells, and like a lot of people seem to buy those ones. Great, I'm sure like they have lanolin, so the wool will be more conditioned, but I don't think you need it. Angelini Knits has suggested that she has never bought shampoo for her wool because she just uses hair shampoo, and I have tried that before and it works exactly the same. I have also put hair conditioner on my knits to make them a little bit softer when they get itchy. I literally just use like my normal conditioner. This is totally not a promotion. I just use the Tresemme like rich moisture one, which I always use for my hair anyway, because it's nice and cheap, it lasts me a long time, and it does make my hair smoother, so I thought it will make my knits also smoother, and it does. I did that on my April cardigan because it was insanely itchy because I used Drops Flora and Drops Mohair, and I'm very sensitive to alpaca, and it has made me able to wear this cardigan like all the time. That said, I did buy this wool wash when I first kind of started because it wasn't too expensive. I think it was like £4 for this bottle, and as you can see I haven't still used it up, and it was like 2-3 years ago, so it has lasted me a long time. It does say 16 washes, but I don't know how much of this stuff you would have to use to get 16 washes out of it. I don't think I used like a full cap. I think I use like half. Yarn Swift and ball winder. I can't show you one because I do not own one, and I really do not think those are necessities whatsoever. It depends. Obviously, if you do use a lot of hand-dyed yarns or yarns that come in hanks, these are hanks of yarn. They basically do not come as balls. They kind of end up just like as a one big loop. Typically yarn obviously comes in balls where they're wound up. If you do end up buying hanks, I still don't think it's necessary. You can utilise a chair or your partner or a friend to have the yarn around, and that will be your Yarn Swift. You can use your hand or like a toilet roll to wrap it around. I can demonstrate. You literally just do that and you just carry on for a little bit, and then you take it off your hand and then you go another direction, and then once you get bored you go another direction, and once you get bored you go another direction, and you switch directions so you don't end up with like one big kind of roll of it. You end up having a ball instead. It's very easy, it's relatively mindless, you can do it while you're watching TV. I do usually employ my boyfriend to do it for me because I do not have the patience, but I also am too stubborn to buy a ball winder and a yarn swift. A lot of stores will do it for you for free, so if you go to a yarn store, if you buy a hank in there, they will likely have a swift and a ball winder and you'll be able to do it there, or sometimes they will wind it for you, or you can use theirs for a small fee, so it's a bit more mid-tier because you have to pay additional monies. If you do want to spend the money, I do think that like yarn swifts are quite expensive, so if you do have the money, you want to splurge out on one, I wouldn't recommend buying a cheap one because I've heard so many people say that they just break instantly and it's just pointless. Might as well like save up a little bit more money and go for the better one that will last you a bit longer, especially if you do use a lot of hand-dyed yarn. You can always find like a more expensive one and then use Facebook Marketplace or like Gumtree or something like that to find a second-hand version of it. Blocking mats and blocking pins. This is a two-sided story. If you do knit a lot of cables, I do think it's useful to have blocking pins. I do also have blocking mats and I am sitting on them right now because I've got a professional filming setup, recording on my phone, and I'm sitting on a pile of my blocking mats and towels. If you do knit a lot of cables, it is quite useful to kind of stretch out your knits and be able to pin them in place, especially for my Ingrid sweater. I did find that was very useful. I did enjoy having blocking mats then, but sometimes I won't even use my blocking mats. I will literally just put out a towel and use that instead. You can use like old bedding, you can just like fold it a few times and it will dry a lot faster. A lot of people also use like netting, so they will put a net over their like area at home and then just put their knit on top so that they get a lot of airflow from the top and bottom, and apparently they end up drying a lot faster. I will definitely get one of those once I have my own place and I'm not just renting a room. If you are pinning down your knits, make sure they are stainless steel or plastic or something that does not corrode. I made that mistake and I thought it would be fine. The pins didn't say that they were stainless steel or anything. They were ones that came with my blocking mats, funnily enough. It did not end well. My lovely white Robinson wrap cardigan has these orange dots on them, on it. They're more visible down here as well. In the past, when I blocked my knits, I actually used to just put them into a towel, like obviously like try and squish it with my hands, but then I'd put it into a towel, fold the towel like a burrito and then step on it a few times, but the towels just ended up being soaking wet and my knits ended up taking quite a while to dry. And my friend told me that she just puts them in the washing machine and puts the spin on without like any wash cycle, literally just on the spin sitting, and I think I use 1200 RPM, and I do that for every single knit that I have, and I use it for non-superwash yarn and it's absolutely fine because you haven't got any friction in there. If you're worried, you can also put it into a pillowcase or like a mesh bag if you have one to prevent it from like catching on anything in the washing machine, but I do think it's a really good idea because the knits end up being like almost fully dry and then they dry within a few hours, which is just insane, especially in English weather. Because the washing machine uses centrifugal force, it doesn't cause felting because it's not rubbing against your knit, it's literally just going like this instead of like. If you knit a lot of garments, what is very, very helpful are barber cords. They're called like stitch holders or something, but the most popular brand is barber cord. I have not purchased from them before. What I typically do, and this is the budget tier version, is I go on Etsy or Amazon, but I do find Etsy a little bit cheaper, and I buy like 8 meters of this stuff. It's called hollow elastic tubing with 2mm diameter. Basically pop it onto your needles, like on the end of them. You can just slip your stitches onto them. It really depends the quality on where you buy them from. I've heard that it's a little bit annoying to use them if they're like very frictiony, but these ones haven't failed me. I just got them off of Etsy. I do cut them to size because I'm cheap. I think I got them for like £3 or something for like 8 meters. To last a while, they're perfect. They let you try on your knits rather than having to hold onto a piece of thread. For budget option is you can just use waste yarn. I do find that very annoying because it just takes so long to like put your stitches on hold. What you can also do, if you do have interchangeable needles, you can add cable connectors to your cables and connect like several different cable sizes, and I used to do that all the time before I discovered these things, but literally since I got them I just use these things all the time because they're just so useful. The only issue with using cable connectors is that like screwing them on is very annoying, and then unscrewing them can be very annoying as well. When you're trying your knits on, the cables are a lot more rigid than these like hollow tubes. You can't see the drape of the fabric as well because they put a little bit more weight on there. Sock blockers. If you've watched my channel, you know that I refuse to buy sock blockers. I do think that they are definitely very cool, and you can buy ones that are just kind of like an outline of a foot. They dry a lot quicker, but I don't need that. Like, I only have them to take cute pictures for Instagram, because realistically you do not need to block your socks unless you're taking pictures of your knits or you want them to look nicely like when stored. If you do want that and you don't want to buy sock blockers, you can do what I did and make them out of cardboard. I got these, I wrapped them in cling film, I put sellotape around them. I basically cut them out by putting a sock on piece of cardboard that I have, like the finished sock, and then I traced around it. I kind of smoothed out the outline and measured my foot to make sure that the length matches. I added these little hooks in the top so I can just hook it onto, I don't think it's gonna work. No, it does work, but yeah, I do that basically on kind of any surface that I have. I know I could just buy a set of sock blockers, but why? These work really well. They actually do not get soggy because I've wrapped them so well. D-pillar. This is something that I do find to be essential, not just as a knitter but as a clothing owner, because your clothes will get bobbly and you can just use this thing and like depill them, and then bobbles just collect in there. You can empty that and it's just perfect. You can make your clothes look newer by just like running this along. I don't think specifically an electric one is essential, because what I used to do, and this is very annoying, you can just use like a single-use razor, or like whatever razor you use, you can just use that and then depill your clothing, but those get like stuck in there and it's a lot of faff. But you can do that. I used to do that when I was younger and I couldn't afford one of these. They aren't very expensive, I think maybe like £5, but obviously if you do not have the money, that's okay. You can literally just use a razor. You can also buy manual ones if you hate the sound of this thing, because it just sounds like a saw. They're very effective, they're very useful. This one's very bulky so I'm not sure if I'd recommend it, but it does the job. You can also get like handheld ones, so you basically just do that, which is essentially a glorified razor in my opinion. They do seem to be a little bit more expensive as well. Yarn bowls. Essentially, they are just a bowl that has a little hole at the back to like fit your yarn through so that it doesn't get like tangled and your ball doesn't like fly around. You can see how much I use this thing by what I store in there. I literally never use this thing, I just use it as a pen holder. I did get this as a present from a friend, so obviously I didn't want to get rid of it. It's got a cute little sheepy on it. Just never use this thing, so I do think I wouldn't spend my money on it. Obviously if you think it's cute, if you do think you'll use it, it's great, but I also don't think it stops the yarn from like falling out, because it will still bounce out. I guess it helps like the yarn not get quite as tangled. The use is very minimal. If you do end up going for one, I would recommend getting one with like a swirly hole rather than just one circle at the back, because then you obviously will have to cut your yarn to get it out, or you'll have to use up all the yarn. Needle stoppers, again, it's not something that I have. You just pop like a little stopper on the end of your needle, and it can be useful if you do find yourself with your stitches just falling off your needles when you store them all the time. However, what I do is I pull all my stitches to the end of my work, like not the end as in where the needles are, but I just pull all my stitches off onto the cable and I just stick my needles into the yarn. This is especially useful if you have two balls of yarn, just like I have on this project. Crochet hooks. I know we're talking about knitting right now, but crochet hooks, especially if you're starting out, are a game changer for like picking up dropped stitches. You can grab a stitch, pop it on, grab a stitch, pop it on, and I used to use them all the time. I still use them for like if I have a large section of stitches that I need to pick up, but since I have obviously learned to do it without them, just using my needles, you do figure it out over time, but it is a lot easier to just use a hook. On that topic, cable needles. These are basically just like normal they're kind of like DPNs but with a little funky bit on them. You can also get ones that look like a massive stitch marker. These essentially are just to hold your stitches in front of or at the back of your work as you're doing a cable round. I did used to find them very helpful, though these specific ones, like, they tend to fall out of my work, but since I have learned how to cable without a cable needle, I don't find them particularly like necessary or useful anymore. Neck clamp. I know this is very silly, and again, this is a present that I got from my boyfriend. It is totally not necessary, but it is a game changer if you have someone in your life that refuses to use the main light and you're knitting on something that requires looking at. The main light in a room is my partner's nemesis, so he refuses to have it on so we have to have like lamps that are like on the side, and they just do not give me enough light for knitting. He did get me the neck clamp and I was a bit like, what are you doing? Like, it's cute, it's a cute thought, but why? And I haven't used it, and I thought he returned it. Basically, he still has one. Then I saw Knits by Mandy talk about the neck clamp that she has, and I got influenced, so I started using it, and it is actually quite useful. Certainly not a necessity. It's not something that you need, but it is a cool gadget. Travel knitting, I think it would be quite useful if you're like on a coach or if you're on a plane and it's like dark and you know, like you've got those little lamps above you. Sometimes they're a bit annoying, so you can just have one around your neck and you can like knit away. Row counter. It's not something I do have like in real life. I don't use like a clicker one. I did have one, I think, but I don't really find them useful. So what I use instead is I used to just use my phone. There is an app that you can get where you can just like track your rows. If you're someone that doesn't like that, obviously you can get the clicker. You can get ones that go on your finger or on your wrist, I think, and then you can just click. But I also do forget to do that. I did forget to like pop it in the app and I got confused. I will write out a little table of the amount of rows by the amount of repeats. Do a right side row, wrong side row, and then repeats that I have to do, and I will just tick X in each column for those, because I just find it so much more useful and I can track it, and I do actually remember to do that. I either do it in my little notebook or I do it on the pattern, like when I mark it up on my iPad. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what knitting notions you can't like imagine not having. If you do disagree with any of my opinions, do let me know down below, and I will see you in the next ones. Bye.